Tēnā koutou katoa. My name's Niamh Flynn. I'm speaking on behalf of Greenpeace Aotearoa. I'm sure some of what I have to say you've heard from others today, but I represent the tens of thousands of Greenpeace supporters from across Aotearoa. So we really appreciate the opportunity to appear before you and discuss this bill that in our view represents a serious threat to the democratic freedoms that New Zealanders hold dear. Greenpeace opposes this bill in its entirety. At its heart, we believe this bill seeks to criminalise protest, which is a vital democratic right that has helped shape Aotearoa's history and identity. And we believe that how we treat protest matters. Public protest isn't a nuisance to be managed. It's a cornerstone of our democracy. From women's suffrage to our nuclear-free stance, progress in this country has always depended on the ability of citizens to stand up and speak out, and sometimes that makes those in power uncomfortable. For many New Zealanders, protest is not the first step, it's a last resort. People go through these processes of writing submissions and contacting their MPs and voting and signing petitions. But when those formal channels fail to deliver meaningful change, peaceful protest is the only remaining way to make our voices heard. So therefore, to restrict protest is to silence those who've already exhausted every other democratic avenue. And it sends the message that speaking truth to power is permitted only when it's convenient. And that really undermines the very essence of participatory democracy. This bill risks silencing the public voice. It would punish people for what it terms targeted and disruptive demonstrations near residential premises. And those terms are so vague and so broad that almost any peaceful protest could fall within them. We know that protest is important for democracy, and the effectiveness of protest depends on being seen and being heard by decision makers. And that's sometimes at their offices, sometimes outside Parliament, and occasionally near their homes or the residences of diplomatic representatives. One of the examples in our written submission is the Supreme Court in Morse v. Police. They made it very clear, saying that it's legitimate for protesters to choose the time and the place and the manner of their protest to ensure that the message is effective. And this bill would strip citizens of that right. It tells New Zealanders that you can protest, but only when and where it doesn't bother anyone in power. And that is not democracy. That is convenience for the powerful. We also submit that there are existing laws that already cover harmful conduct in protests. So if the purpose of this bill is to manage protests that get out of hand, then it's unnecessary. We already have extensive laws to deal with protests that cross the line into intimidation, harassment, or public disorder. The Summary Offences Act already prohibits disorderly behaviour and offensive language, obstruction, and intimidation. The Trespass Act protects private property. The Harassment Act protects individuals from sustained or targeted abuse. There is no gap in the law that this bill needs to fill. What this bill would do instead is create a new offence where none is needed and give police sweeping discretion to decide what counts when it comes to protest as disruptive. So we submit that the bill's drafting is so vague and so broad that it invites overreach. It doesn't define what near means. So it opens the question of, could a protest on a main street be deemed near a residence that happened to be above a shop? It doesn't require any proof that a protest was actually disruptive, only that a person ought to have known that it might be. And we think that that kind of uncertainty creates a chilling effect. People will avoid protesting for fear of arrest. And it's at that point when democracy starts to erode. So as drafted, even peaceful protests outside of embassies could be criminalised, simply because ambassadors happen to live in the buildings where they work, and potentially in central civic areas if officials live nearby. And I would submit that protests in these spaces has long been part of New Zealand's democratic tradition, including from the protests over the Dawn Raids and the Vietnam War. So it goes far back. And the breadth of this bill goes far beyond its stated goal of protecting privacy. As you've heard from other submitters, this bill is also inconsistent with the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act and our international obligations under the ICCPR. It undermines the rights to freedom of expression, freedom of peaceful assembly, freedom of association, and freedom of movement. Article 17 of the ICCPR, which the bill's explanatory note cites, protects against arbitrary, unlawful interference with privacy. Peaceful protest isn't arbitrary or unlawful. And by contrast, the Articles 19, 21, and 22 affirm the very rights that this bill is seeking to curtail. There's also precedent in Brooker v. Police from 2007, where the Supreme Court held that protest outside a private residence can be legitimate political expression. The majority found that annoyance or discomfort does not justify criminalization. And I quote here, "A tendency to annoy others, even seriously, is insufficient to constitute a disruption to public order." And that principle, in my view, remains true today. Democracy requires tolerance of speech and actions that might disturb, inconvenience, and embarrass people in power. And the right to privacy cannot outweigh the public's right to hold its leaders to account. So while this bill might seem minor, its implications are profound. It does shift, it signals a shift away from an open, free society in which the right to protest peacefully is enshrined, and moves us towards controlled dissent. It tells ordinary people, students, workers, environmental defenders, that our right to protest can be revoked when it becomes politically inconvenient, and we should be working to strengthen New Zealand's long history of peaceful protest, not weaken it. So in summary, Greenpeace submits that this bill is unnecessary. We already have laws that cover harmful protest behaviour. It's dangerously vague, which risks overreach and chilling lawful protest. It conflicts with fundamental rights under NZBORA and international law, and it undermines democracy by shielding decision makers from accountability. So for these reasons, Greenpeace Aotearoa urges the committee to reject this bill in its entirety. We submit that a strong democracy doesn't fear protest, it protects it. So thank you for the opportunity to submit, and I welcome any questions that you have.
Well, thank you for that, Ms. O'Flynn. I'm just looking around at members. Look, well, I was going to ask you, towards the end there, you sort of implied that it was because the need to protest is such an important thing. You don't seem to, in your conversation, have regard for any of the privacy or protection or quiet enjoyment of politicians or judges or whatever. Do you think at what point do you think a protest becomes disruptive in front of, say, a judge or a politician or whatever? What do you gauge that boundary to be?
Well, I think when we start to consider being comfortable or not uncomfortable as a right, that's kind of the slippery slope here for me. I did acknowledge privacy. We have, the Harassment Act, the Trespass Act, we protect private property. So I think that is already accounted for in existing law. So obviously we need to treat people with respect, but we do need to be able to challenge ideas. And as I pointed out earlier, I think when we've been through every other official channel to make our voices heard as members of the public, protest really is a last resort.
Yeah, I heard that justification, but so do you think protesting outside someone's house all night long with pots and pans, do you think that's getting past the point of being disruptive, or you think just because someone's chosen a public office and some people happen to have a different view on a policy, the means justify the ends justify the means, and therefore you're entitled to do what you like at 4 o'clock in the morning? I'm just trying to understand where you see the boundary to be.
Well, I'm not a police person or a judge, and I would leave it to them to interpret the Harassment Act. But I think there are laws that cover harassment. And similarly, if my child decided to play drums at 4 o'clock in the morning, I would expect that the neighbours would make a noise complaint, and that would be dealt with under existing laws.
Okay. Now I've got a question from Ms. Nuckley.
Yeah, Ms. O'Flynn, so you there's a strong message there that if this law passes, that it will seriously undermine democracy and people's right to protest. So is it not clear that this is about residential premises, protesting in front of or next to a residential premises? Do you feel that's not clear enough in the new proposed offence, engaging in targeted and disruptive demonstration near residential premises? Do we need to make it clearer if it's not clear? Because the way you make it sound is as if we're saying no protest to anyone, anywhere.
No, I'm submitting that it is very broad and there's no definition of what near to a residence means or what a residence is. And I would submit that if we're limited to being unable to protest outside an embassy where officials may live, that those are often public places where it's very important for protests to happen, for decision makers to hear from the people that are being impacted or the people that have something to say about what is happening in government policy.
So if we were to change it to make it clearer, in your opinion, about what near a residential premises is, would you be okay with us continuing to say that people shouldn't be able to be disruptive in a protest in front of a residential premises? Would you be okay with it then, on behalf of?
No, I don't think it's retrievable to say that we shouldn't be able to protest near residential premises, because I think being able to protest where you can be seen and heard by decision makers is very important, and anything that we're doing at this point to limit public participation in protest is a problem.
Right,
So
I've just got a question. If you finished, Rima, or not?
Well, I guess the question becomes what we've been asking everyone, and you know, you're representing thousands of people from Greenpeace. So is it okay for people to be not allowed to pray in silence outside of abortion clinics? Is that okay, or should they be allowed to pray in silence outside of an abortion clinic?
I think that speaks to the core of this. I may not like that someone wants to protest outside an abortion clinic or near an abortion clinic, but I think that's not the law we're discussing, and I believe that protest is important regardless of which side of the political fence you sit on.
Okay. Dr. Sunan?
Thank you. Thank you for that submission, Niamh. My question to you now, noting that Greenpeace is a global organization, and we heard from a previous submitter in terms of this bill being a part of a global trend to criminalize political protest. Through Greenpeace, have you seen some of the chilling effects of bills like this being introduced in other countries that has, in fact, prevented protest, or has criminalized, or has meant an increase in arrests?
Yeah, I think we're seeing massive changes, particularly in the United States and in the United Kingdom, where laws to protest have been changed. For example, the protest laws around protesting the war in Gaza in the UK, where people protesting that are now breaking another law just by protesting. And I think we don't want to set people up to break laws. We want to enable people to protest peacefully and stand up and have their voices heard. And I think we can all agree that in Aotearoa, we have a better, stronger civic society than in some of those countries I've just mentioned, because we have strongly stood up for people's right to protest.
All right. Hey, thank you very much for your submission this afternoon and taking the time to join us. Thank you.